Welcome to Doggone Basics. I'm your host, Lori Vallone, pack leader at Doggone Good Consulting. Together with Suki, Loki, and Isaac, we'll be bringing you a series of short videos we call Doggone Basics. These videos will be focused on Power Apps and Power Automate primarily, with a little bit of Power BI thrown in for good measure. They're designed to be short so that you can either learn a concept or refresh your memory over something very specific. This is our inaugural episode, and so I thought we'd start at the beginning with a look at columns, records, and tables to make sure we have a solid foundation on which to build all of the other stuff we want to do. So let's dive in. Okay, let's use a simple example that everybody should be familiar with. A receipt from a grocery store. I live 25 miles from the nearest grocery store, so when I go, I got a whole bunch of stuff on my receipt. So here is a picture from a receipt at my local store. They probably look very similar to yours. Center of the receipt, you got the name of the item. You got your price. You have an indicator to show whether it's taxable or not, and you have some way that shows savings. Different stores represent this in different ways, but at my store you'll see the savings listed underneath the items. In some cases you'll see, for example, in this case I had 3 cans of beans. They were each normally $1.12, but we had savings of 12 cents per can, so they wound up being $1 a can. Okay, representative example. So for the information that we've got garnered from this particular receipt, we have an item name. Bush's reduced sodium was the RS, red, and I know this was kidney beans. Obviously you have to be somewhat capable of deciphering abbreviations to figure out what some of these items are, and some of them I just frankly never figure out. We paid $1 a can, we purchased 3, they were taxable items, and we saved 12 cents a can. So if we look at that in terms of columns, if we were saving this information, we would have an item column, a price column, a quantity column, a taxable column, which is kind of an indicator of yes or no, and we would have a savings column. Okay, notice that I've made these names pretty short. They're easier to work with that way, and kind of a best practice, you don't want to have spaces in your names. You want to either put an underscore, or I just put the words right up against each other. It makes it a lot easier. Yes, you can use spaces, but you wind up having to put everything in quotes. It's harder to read, it's harder to deal with, so I recommend just don't. One word names, or make them one word by putting your words together. And just a matter of practice, capitalize the beginning of words. It just makes it easier to read. So we have our columns, which are the individual pieces of information that we took from our receipt, and we could have had some additional ones. These were the ones that I found were relevant. If we were to take all of those columns together, we would have a record. So one record is made up of the item, price, quantity, taxable status, and savings for one thing on my receipt. You'll notice that kind of equates to a row. Now, granted, some of this information has come across multiple physical rows on the receipt because of the way it lays out with how many I purchased and how the savings are recorded, but effectively one major line item on the receipt equates to a record. And if I looked at the data for that item that we started looking at here, this is how it would be represented as a record. We had the name, the price, how many, whether it was taxable, and what the savings were. And I looked at this on a per item basis. You'll notice I had $1 and I had 12 cents. Now I can get to the fact that I spent $3 on kidney beans, and I can get back to what my full price would have been, because my savings was 12 cents a can. My price was that I paid was $1. I could get back to and still calculate what the original price was if I needed to. So all that information is available to me beyond what I've recorded because I made a good choice for the columns that I want to keep in my record. Going one level further then, a table is a collection of records. So a record is a collection of columns. A table is a collection of records. And so all of the individual items that I purchased when I was at the store, those would make up my table. So here's a record for vinegar. I paid $2.88. I got one of those. It was taxable, and I actually saved a $1.44. I think this was a buy one get one free. I haven't figured out what Da Vinci 729 is, but I bought one of them for $1.58, and they were on sale for 40 cents off. And finally I had Jello banana pudding for $1.05, and it was not on sale. So you'll notice my sale column is just simply 0. So I could go on, but won't. But this makes up the table. Now, we could also look at the receipt that this purchases were made on. We might want to also save things like the name of the store, the city and state where the store was located, the date that I shopped. There's other information there that I may or may not care about: phone number, address, manager, who was my cashier. For my example, I don't really care. I want to know where I shopped, which store, and when I shopped. So I would have a receipt table, a store table that would contain the store name, the city, the state, and the receipt date. So in this case, it might look like this: Ingalls in Bryson City, North Carolina, which is near where I live. And this particular receipt was from January 15th of this year. We need one more piece of information, though, if we want to be able to relate this receipt for this particular shopping day back to the list of items that I purchased. We need a way to link those two up. We could link it on name and date put together, but that becomes kind of a complex key, and it's a little more problematic to deal with. Doable, but simpler if we simply have a receipt ID. So since this is the first receipt that we are capturing, we'll call it receipt 1. And so we would have an additional field on our table, additional column on our table, that's part of each record. And this one would be receipt 1. If I went shopping on February 15th, I might have receipt 2. Okay. And now that gives us a way to link our receipts with our items. So our receipt 1 from January 15th, we can use that to reference here on each of our items. So on receipt 1, item 1 was my kidney beans. Receipt 1, item 2 was my vinegar. Receipt 1, item 3 was whatever the heck this is. And receipt 1, item 4 was my banana pudding. Okay, so by using the ID, one for the receipt table and one for the item table, I can reference a specific instance, a specific record, and from that I can get to the individual columns that are within that record. Make sense? All right, well, let's look at a second example to help kind of cement this. Let's assume we have a menu from a restaurant. This is a new one that recently opened here in Bryson City, and a pretty good one too. Maybe we want to keep track of the restaurants that we go to, some of the menu items they have, so that if we're looking to go eat a particular thing, we can say, oh yeah, 1101 Main has that, let's go there. So we might have a restaurant table that identifies the place, and a menu item table that identifies the food that they have at that restaurant. See the similarity to our receipt and menu item example that we just did? So here I've put together a list of the columns that might make up a record for the restaurant table. Name of the restaurant, the street address, city, state, zip, how do I contact them, What type of food do they have? Are they Italian? Are they a buffet? Are they American? Do they offer delivery? Do they take reservations? And then perhaps any notes I have. Makes sense for a restaurant table. Then at the menu item level, the individual detail things that are here, I would have the item, a description of that item, what kind of food is it? Is it an appetizer? Is it a main course? Is it a dessert? What's the price? I might have a personal rating. Is this a 5-star place, a menu item, or is this only a 3-star? And chances are I'm only going to put my higher rated items in this list anyway. I'm probably not going to enter the entire menu, but you get the point. And again, some notes for the menu item. So now let's look at how we would take this and instantiate it in SharePoint. Let me flip over here to SharePoint. There we go. I do most of my development in SharePoint as a citizen developer for my organization. I have free access to SharePoint without having to really answer to anybody. I have the ability to create a team, which generates a SharePoint site, which gives me the place I need to be able to develop whatever I want with Power Apps, Power Automate, Power BI. And so SharePoint is my go-to tool. We have SQL Server, we have Azure. Those are predominantly used by our IT folks. So everything you'll pretty much see me do will be in SharePoint. In this case, I set up a restaurants list and a menu items list. And you'll see, just as we had for our receipts example, we need an ID number. And SharePoint is nice enough to assign that ID number for us automatically. And so we can have an ID, we can have use the title field. SharePoint automatically creates a title field for you. Now there's some ways around turning that off, and we'll probably look at that in a future video. But in this case, we needed a title field. We're going to use it for our restaurant name. We have our street address, our city, our state, which in this case I believe I made it into a list of the choices of the states near me that I'm liable to eat in. Most of the other fields we've seen so far have just been text fields. A phone number is a text field. Type of food is a choice field. And delivery and reservations are yes/no fields. And then finally we have notes, which is a multi-line text field. Okay, so I was able to just simply create my restaurants list here in SharePoint. Same thing with menu items. Okay, we have here, first off, we have a restaurant ID that shows which restaurant the menu item is at. I need to be able to link it back. I actually didn't display here the ID field, but I could have for the menu item. It's going to be less important to me. I'm going to probably be looking for things here by name, but I have my title of my menu item, I have the description, price, whether or not it contains any allergens, what food category it's in, a rating, and some notes. Okay, so we've instantiated this record. I have 3 records here. Each one of these is a column, and collectively the list is my table. Hopefully you're with me so far. Now let's take this directly into Power Apps. What I want to show you is 3 different ways that you can then see the contents of your table and to get to your records and your columns in Power Apps. First off, typically you're going to look at a list like this in a gallery. Sometimes you won't. Sometimes you may be looking at it in a form. There may be other ways you're going to do it. But often if you're looking at wanting to see multiple items from that list at the same time, the gallery is how you're going to do it. So in this case, I've added a gallery here to my page, and I've linked it to the restaurant's data source. And here then in my gallery, I have included labels that enabled me to display the individual columns. So here I have the reservations column that I want to display, and by using the this item dot construct, it allows me to get a particular instance, a record from that list, and display it here. So in this case, I'm displaying the reservations field. Because reservations is a true false field and I want to show yes no, I used an if statement with it to get that out. Others are more straightforward. In this case, the title field, which contains the name of the restaurant. Over here we have the type of food, etc. Okay, so that's one way that you may get information out of your table, is to create labels that allow you to specify the name of a column and put it on the screen. Another way you may look at it, and this is something fairly new, is there is a debugging facility that is very helpful that's been added to Power Apps fairly recently. And if I turn this on, and actually you used to have to turn it on, I think this may automatically be on by default now. I think this may have moved over, but because I went looking for the switch and I don't see the switch where I saw it before. So I think this is just available now. If I click on the name of the field in the function box here, you'll notice it brings up beneath here and tells me what's the data type. It's a table. Okay. If I then click on the down arrow, I can see the data that it's looking at for that table. Here's a record and here's a column. Okay, so there's my address column. All right, and I can actually scroll across here and see other fields on that record. Phone number, reservations, there, as I mentioned, was a true false field, the restaurant ID, etc. All right, so that's another way that you can see into a record and see what's the data inside of it, okay, and what's inside of a table. The third way is if you load your data into a collection. And here I have in my on start for my app, I'm building a collection. That's my only statement here. Yeah, it is. I'm just simply loading the data from the restaurants table list, in this case, since it's SharePoint, into a collection called collection restaurants. I start all of my variables with an indicator to say what type of thing they are. And in this case, since this is a collection, I start all my collections with COL. Now I can do a couple of things here. The best thing I can do is to come up here under View, Collections, and find my collection in the list. This is going to show me the first 5 items in this collection. Okay, so this is not helpful if you are looking to understand all of the data in your collection and see a record that's beyond the first 5. It is very helpful if all you're wanting to do is look and make sure what the columns are, how they're defined. It's a good quick way to take a look, because there's my title, my type of food. Let's see what else we got here. If I come back over, notes, ID, delivery. Okay, so this is a good quick way to be able to look and see if what my data looks like. Okay, so that's how we can see columns, records, and tables in Power Apps. Let's flip over to Power Automate, and an example of how we might see this here is since this is a SharePoint list, we have a flow that has a get items in it. And when we execute this flow, which is getting, in this case, the restaurants table, and if I execute this particular flow, which should run pretty quick, and it did. Let's look here at the results. If we look at the outputs side of this step and we look down here in the body, we'll see that in this JSON, and you don't need to understand JSON to get this information out of this, you'll see that those column names that we were talking about are here. Restaurant ID 1. Address is 209 Macon Avenue. The title was right above here. I see it peeking out. Title, Blue Ridge Buffet. Fantastic restaurant, by the way. You can absolutely stuff yourself silly with gourmet food there. So if you're ever in Asheville, I highly recommend it. A phone number. I throw in a bogus number. It's a buffet. They don't have delivery, obviously, and you definitely need a reservation to get in there. Okay, so there's also some other fields here like the date it was modified, the date it was created that you may or may not need. But you can easily pick out from here the field information. So that's how in a flow you might go about looking at the column information. So that kind of wraps up our discussion of columns, records, and tables. Hopefully it gave you a base understanding if it's something that you were not previously familiar with. I hope you'll come back for another episode of Doggone Basics. I invite you to follow me on Twitter. I'm at L Valone. That's V as in Victor, ALONE. And my website is doggonegoodconsulting.com. Until then, may the power be with you.